your time this morning to talk to us. My name is Brandon, and my group member here, Vlad, is also here.
Hello.
And my other group member, Tita.
Hello.
Hi, we're just calling to ask a few basic questions as first-year community college students who aren't scientists, who aren't necessarily going to go into a scientific field, but want to ask questions that, as someone who is an expert in this field, first questions we want to ask are like what your name is, what your professional title, and how a typical day at your work is.
Yeah, I'm Professor Marcus Feldman in the biology department at Stanford. I direct a couple of institutes here at Stanford. One is concerned with genetics and evolution. The other one is concerned with population demography and things connected with population like migration and the sex ratio in populations. And I do mostly theoretical work, so I construct mathematical models and analyze those mathematical models, try to figure out what the fate of new mutations introduced into a population or a new species that arises would be.
Okay.
That's what I do. I'm also working a lot in non-biological evolution, that is the evolution of cultural things, like some behaviors, opinions, conformity to the way others behave, that kind of thing, and how that spreads through populations like an epidemic.
Wow, super interesting. So I also want to ask you, what are some misconceptions about genetics that you've encountered among students and the general public? So, for example, one thing I've heard a lot is, and is usually pretty popular in the internet, is about the other Professor Dawkins, how he talks about memes and stuff like that. Yeah. What do you have to say about people? What is something you think people get wrong?
First of all, Dawkins oversimplifies the issue of genetics. You can't really think about traits and phenotypes like height or body mass index or mental diseases in terms of a single gene. The genome itself, that's all the genes, very complicated. And most traits that we're interested in, if they're influenced by genes at all, they're influenced by many, many genes, each of which have relatively small effects.
Okay.
So keeping track of all of that is not a trivial statistical problem.
Of course, yeah.
I think that one of the most famous examples is genes and intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I've written a lot about the errors that people have made in talking about genes for intelligence. That word "for" is incorrectly used to indicate these genes are causal for intelligence. And so those are kinds of issues that I write about in trying to help the public understand the complexity of genes and how the environmental interactions with genes are very important.
Okay. Yeah, because I feel like as someone who maybe just doesn't really know anything about biology and genetics and hears people talk about, everything is predeterministic and you're basically, if you are smart, we're born smart, right? And it's basically, I feel like that's an oversimplification of everything. And to take this as a more scientific approach where we don't really know, and basically that there's so many other factors that play a role in predeterminism. Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like this is very important to like the everyday public, because people might get that misconception, and you get horrible like policies that may arise from it, like eugenics and
Yeah,
racism and discrimination and stuff, from people who don't really, I feel like, wouldn't understand
that's correct.
everything there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank
Oh,
you for explaining that question. And also wanted to ask you, like, then how does like your work and your mathematical models help us understand complex traits such as height, intelligence, susceptibility to diseases?
well, the way in which it does is together with a colleague, Professor Cavalli Sforza, who died about 5 years ago, the two of us invented a field of cultural evolutionary studies in which we look for how things like attitudes, religion, politics is passed from parents to child, but not genetically. Just, we call it cultural transmission, where children learn and from their parents, offspring learn. They also learn from their peers by social transmission. These days, they're learning a lot from social media.
Yeah.
Those vehicles that help transmit information have become are very powerful, and they may, in fact, override any biological so-called determination. And I put that in quotes because I don't like biological determination, but the biological contributions to whatever it is you're trying to measure. So a lot of my work concerns trying to point out to people the importance of cultural transmission and the social milieu in which you live in contributing to the traits that you have.
Of course. And do you think social media is playing more of a negative or more of a positive impact in people?
My impression is that for adolescents, it's playing a negative role. Two ways. First of all, it's detracting from the desire of people in school to read. It's not good in helping them to write. And I think one of the big deficiencies, I think, over the past 20 years is how well high school students write. They're getting much worse. And we notice it in the essays that college students write in their final papers, that they really all of these, the progress in computing and word processing and social media have led to a simplification of language, a drop in vocabulary,
Of course.
and I think that it doesn't help in the long run for the students. It really detracts from their chances to get ahead.
Of course. Yeah, I could also, if I have to be honest, with my experience, right, using so much autocorrect and stuff like that, I totally forget to write how basic words are spelled and stuff like that. Even my vocabulary, sometimes it's not something very good.
Grammar too.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, Professor, I just have one or two more questions, and I think that'll be it. So I don't take too much of your day. The other question that I was going to ask was, are there any ethical considerations or implications that arise from using mathematical models to study complex traits, particularly in the context of personalized medicine or counseling?
I can tell you some very important ones that are coming up now. If the biological advances that have been made so that you can sequence the DNA relatively cheaply, then you might say this piece of DNA seems to be determining some trait. Like, let's pick an example, the difference between blonde hair and brown hair.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, parents might decide, oh, I don't want to have any dark-haired children. I just want to have blonde children. So I'll have my my gynecologist or obstetrician only use those embryos that have the gene for blonde hair.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So what that does is remove a certain fraction of potential births that might have been there, that might have caused variation.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, the parents and the doctor are determining what's in the population. Of course. By doing that. So you can think of it either before the egg is implanted, so it's pre-implantation, or newborn screening. You might say, I don't want that child when the baby is born, because it looks like there's a 10% chance that it might get schizophrenia or something like that. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. So those ethical issues are becoming important in the world of genetics, and not just those, but also the potential for finding tiny differences that might be in some diseases that are more frequent in white people than they are in, say, African Americans. Mm-hmm. There's one called ApoE4, which contributes to early onset Alzheimer's disease, which is a kind of dementia. Mm-hmm. And that is not very common in African Americans, but it's much more common in European Americans. Of course. And it's different again in Asians. So those, you have to be very careful when you study those kinds of mutations, that you don't say they apply to everybody. Of course, yeah, because everyone's DNA is so different, and we don't really know exactly what would happen if we start messing around. Yeah, well, yeah. There are two aspects to that we're 99.9% similar, but we also have those differences. Mm-hmm. And because there are so many parts of the DNA, you have 6 billion opportunities for a difference. That means that if you have a few thousand, it's a very tiny percent, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. So thank you for answering that question. And I guess the last question we want to answer is, what advice would you give to students like us who want to make the world a better place and want to take the information that you gave us to give it to a broader audience? Well, when you see articles, like it seems as though that you've been reading some, when you see those articles, you can discuss it with your colleagues and your classmates and make sure that everybody knows what has actually been proven and what is a hypothesis and what is a bias. And it sounds to me, from the questions you've asked, is that you've done some reading and that you have a pretty good idea about that. Mm-hmm. And to make it public, talk to your parents about it and talk to your uncles and aunts and make sure that at least they know that that the science of this kind of thing, it's not 100% deterministic, right? Of course, yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, Professor, for taking your time out of your day to talk to us. We really appreciate it. Good luck to you all. See ya. Thank you. Bye-bye.